Yeah. Hi everyone, good morning. Today we will discuss about Rollup, how Rollup works. Okay, here the process of it will process the group of input records that have the same key, and it will generate one output record for each group. Typically, output record summarizes or aggregates the data in some way, like for example, like Rollup might calculate the sum or average of one or more input fields. It can select certain information from each group, and it will print one output record for the each group. And here it has two modes, template mode and expanded mode. In template mode, it will perform normally. It includes aggregate functions, summarize functions. We have certain predefined functions are there that we can use in the template mode. And we have one more mode, that is expanded mode. In this we can use this expanded mode as a non without using these aggregate functions for the group of records. This mode allows for the rollup that do not necessarily use a regular aggregate function. We can use for the group of records manually. When it come to running, it will frequently preceded by partition by key component, which distributes record with the same key to the partitioned way. By default, max core of the rollup is 64 MB. When it comes to runtime behavior of the rollup, it implements a series of transform functions in order to reduce each group of input record into a single output record. If we define a template rollup function, the cooperative system expands it into definition for temporary type and initialize rollup finalize before rollup process any record. And rollup executes the following steps for the each group of records. For suppose like input, the runtime is like this. Like first it will select the input selection function. After that it will go to that keychain function. For only shorter input values, this keychain function will works. After this keychain function or key, it will go to the temporary initialization function. After this temporary initialization, it will go to that computation function, that is basically wrong function. After that it will go to the finalize function. After that it will go to that output without input. It generally don't take any parameters by default. After that it will go to that output selection. Whatever the condition written in this function, those functions, those valid cases will only printed in the output file. In the input selection, if you haven't defined input select function in your transform, it will process on the records. If you define any input select function, rollup filter out the input to records accordingly, and it evaluates two types. Like if it is 0, it won't process that record. If it is 1, then only it will process that record. Like for example, here the input sample input function is there. Like here we are taking like input amount which is greater than 10. Then it will check the every record in that group. If the amount is greater than 10, then only the input record will process, otherwise it won't process that record in a group. After that it will go to that keychain function. It will for every record except the first one. The rollup checks whether the keychain has occurred or not. It will basically works like previous record compared with first record. current record. The rollup compares the current to key value to the previous key value unless the keychain function is defined. For suppose if you take the example here, like at first we initialize the counter as a 0 variable. After that we are using the input 1 as a previous one and input 2 is a current value, and we are incrementing the counter value plus 1. If counter is greater than 0, it again resets the counter to 0 and it will print that counter equal to 0. After this keychain function, it will go to this temporary initialization function. Here it will initialize the temporary variable and also it will initialize that some value to that variable. Here if you see the sample example of the temporary type, here we need to define like type temporary type equal to record. We need to define the data type of that variable, decimal sample I am taking, and the sample I am taking as count as a variable. This is like temporary variable, like we define the count as variable. After that in the instance function we define that temp dot count equal to 0. After this initialization function, rollup between comes to this computation function. The rollup calls the rollup transform function for the each input to record. The input to the rollup function is the input and temporary record for the group to which the input record belongs. The rollup transform function returns an updated temporary record for that input group. If you define a temporary template rollup function that includes a row that does not reference an aggregation function, rollup executes that row only once for each input group. For the non-aggregation rows, it is executed during finalization function. After this computation, it will go to the finalization. In finalization, it will work as two types, for shorted input and for the non-shorted input. And if you see in the shorted input, it calls the finalized transform after it processes on the input record in that group, and it processes the temporary record for each group and the last input record in the group to the transform finalized transform function, and it repeats this procedure with each group. And for the non-shorted input, it initializes function create a temporary record with each following record of the same group, and it updates the temporary record. It reads on the input record into memory and write on the output records to the output port. After it processes on the input record, it calls the finalize transform function with a temporary record for each group and an arbitrary input record for each group as arguments. You can see this example. Here we define the temporary finalize function with the temp as a one of the parameter and this input as a one of the parameter. Here we are initiating that input id, date and count. Here the count it will evaluate every time when processing the group. And after that it will come to this output without input function. If you define this function, it won't have any arguments. It will simply process these records like out.count equal to 0. It will print this variable in the output port. Output select, like if you define this function in the rollup, it will process those records in the output port, and for the rest it will ignores. Like this is the example of the output port. out dot final dot trans total amount is greater than 50. It will print the records only whose total amount is greater than 50. Yeah, this is about the Rollup. Thank you.